Thank you all for being here. On behalf of Lebanon Valley College, welcome to tonight's conversational debate on God. My name is Jeff Robbins, and I'm the chair and professor of religion and philosophy at LVC, and it's my unique privilege to serve as the moderator for tonight's debate between Professor Kitchens of the psychology department and Professor Sayers of the religion and philosophy department. As many of you know, Professors Kitchens and Sayers have spent the last semester co-teaching a class on the God debate. The conversation tonight will be informed by the readings and discussions they've shared in common as a part of that course. It will also, no doubt, be informed by the perspective and insight they've gleaned from the students as they've all collectively wrestled with the big ideas that surround the question of God. As will be evident in the conversation that follows, Professor Kitchens and Sayers approach the question of God from two very different places. Kitchens is a professing Christian who will argue for a biblically based Trinitarian conception of God. He will seek to show how this belief system makes the best and most coherent sense of reality. Sayers calls himself a non-practicing atheist who is unconvinced by the arguments for God's existence, finding them internally contradictory. He also happens to be our resident expert in Hinduism and Buddhism, and so will bring a comparative religious perspective to this debate. Let me briefly say a word about the format for tonight's conversation, and then propose a few reasons why I think this is really important for our college community. We'll reserve approximately 45 minutes or an hour for the moderated portion of the debate. After that time, the floor will be open for questions from the audience. My aim as moderator will be to draw out their differences and to give each the opportunity to give the fullest possible expression to their respective positions as the time allows. We are aware that we are dealing with a sensitive and potentially volatile subject, but we hope to show that even, or perhaps especially, with such a subject, respect and understanding can be won. Finally, my private hope for tonight's debate is that it will serve as a counterproof to the assertion made years ago by perhaps the preeminent American philosopher of the second half of the 20th century, Richard Rorty. Though he was the grandson of the famous social gospel theologian Walter Rauschenbusch, Rorty himself was a staunch secularist for whom religious claims simply did not register as a serious matter of philosophical concern or interest to him. And when it came to his political philosophy, he famously described religion as, quote, a conversation stopper. That is to say, because religion traffics in absolutes, once religious beliefs are invoked, or religious arguments made, individuals and communities with differing religious perspectives have no basis for conversation whatsoever. I believe that tonight we'll see the opposite. Not a conversation stopper, but a conversation starter. And not simply about the existence or non-existence of God, but about such big and consequential ideas as the notion of truth, the quest for meaning, the relationship between religion and science, and much, much more. With that, and without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Kitchens and Sayers with a round of applause. Okay, I'll start out with a question about the class, and for each question we'll give them opportunity to respond and perhaps sort of discuss the issue back and forth amongst themselves. So the first question, this class you've been co-teaching. Give us some of the background about how and why you came to teach the class together, and perhaps as well, how would you characterize the experience of co-teaching a class on a subject such as the God debate with someone with whom you are in basic fundamental disagreement?
You tell the story of the first part better. Why don't you do that?
Well, probably 2 years ago now, I taught a first-year experience course that I called The Case for God. And we read Tim Keller's book, The Reason for God. This is one of the texts that we're using in this course now. The conversation just sort of started, I think, between Dr. Sayers and I, actually Dr. Robbins and I. And I think one time he just asked me, he said, what do you think about the class? And I said, it was really good. I said, I actually wish I could teach it with students that are beyond the freshman level and, it's a little more seasoned students and that kind of thing. And so we said, that sounds like a great idea. I think Professor Sayers actually had read Tim Keller's book, The Reason for God, and we just he said, this is a really great book. This would be a great book to use for the class. And I said, I think so. I said, that's the book that I used. And so the conversation just kind of built from there, and we started setting the class.
All right, and we agreed that it was a great book to use, but for very different reasons, which set up really interesting conversations in class. And I think the second part of the question is what the class looks like, how it works, what's interesting about it. I think every day I learn something new. Michael and I meet for about 30 minutes before each class to sort of hash through what are the main things, what do we want to touch on. And quite frequently we get so distracted just getting in the details that by the time we get to class we have to turn to each other and say, so what are we doing in class? But then it winds up being a conversation where I'll throw out something and a student will respond and Michael will jump in, and it's the dynamic of trying to teach people how to argue and how to articulate someone else's position and then attack that position and then respond to the attack. I've never seen it work so well in class, and that dynamic has set up a phenomenal opportunity for folks to get into arguing every moment of every class.
And just to still build on that a little bit more, I guess, what's it like being a professor in a class and having to cede your authority to a co-instructor on a subject like this? I mean, so each of you, as I said in the introduction, you're coming at this from a very different place. You disagree more than you agree, right? So it must be frustrating on some level to have to listen to Dr. Sayers go on and on about things that you are in fundamental disagreement about, and vice versa, or not. Can you describe that for us?
I don't think frustrating is the right word. I actually think it's fun and it's exciting. I think this is what college should be about, is looking at the ideas and exploring those evidences. And when I taught this course a few years ago, I wanted to have my students have a robust knowledge of the arguments that were at play when I was teaching that first year experience. But I am coming from this from a particular perspective, and I disagree with the other side. So it's hard for me to give, even if I'm trying to give the other side as honest of a look, because it's not my perspective. There's things that I see that don't work, and so having someone in the class who can say, no, you're missing that. You're misrepresenting that, and there's other elements in this argument. Sharpens me, and it makes the class richer. And so it's been a fun experience to do this. And I think that the experience doesn't seem to be undermining in any way, because that's what the class was set up as. I mean, I think the students know that. We know that this is a co-taught course, and so that there are two authorities in there, and there are two experts. Two people have thought about this issue deeply, which makes the experience a little different than what you might find in a typical class.
I think I struggle with the inner know-it-all professor a little more than Dr. Kitchens does. And students in class, if you talk to them, the difference in style, the difference in pedagogical approach was something that Michael and I thought a lot about in the first few classes. Michael's much more deliberate, much more careful. I'm sort of like a runaway freight train, which sometimes works very well and sometimes doesn't. So the first 4 weeks were amazingly interesting for me, because I thought I would just be learning about how to argue about God. I thought I would be working on my sort of argument chops, but it actually became more about pedagogy, more about how to become a better teacher. So for me, I got a lot more out of the class right from the beginning than I thought I would.
Okay, one more kind of meta question before we get to God, I guess. Some would say that the question of the existence of God is a kind of tired and worn out and kind of well-rehearsed debate, that there's really nothing new under the sun. So I guess partly I want you to tell us what is new in the God debate. But more than that, I'm curious about why this debate matters. Why do you think it matters? What difference does it make whether you believe in God?
I don't know that there's anything new in the God debate. I think the arguments that we've been discussing are classic arguments, the same kinds of things that have been discussed for centuries. It doesn't matter. It's worth going over them again and again and again. It's worth rethinking them in light of new evidence, in light of the reality that we live in. It's important to do that. And it matters because it does affect reality. How we think about God fundamentally changes the way we think about reality. I said this, I think, in the first day of class, and that if you believe in God, it will fundamentally change the way you think about the world. And so to have this debate, to have this discussion is absolutely important. It will change the way you think about the world. It will change the way you understand the world. And as I've made the claim that God is essentially an epistemological necessity. It has to begin there.
So the first question was about what's new. I think part of it is every new iteration of the same old argument forces a new thing and pushes you a little further in getting that. And I haven't read extensively in this area, so most of the stuff we're reading I was encountering for the first time. I saw the outlines, I recognized the form of them, but the engagement was new. The other part that I was surprised about was new is forcing myself to argue both sides of the discussion with students pushed me into things that I could never imagine I would sort of get at. So I was having a discussion with Joe, one of the students in class, and he was struggling with, our main author, Keller, wants to preserve the sovereignty of God and wants to have free will. And that was the thing that, throughout my sort of life as an atheist, was really a thing that I could not figure out how to resolve. And through trying to explain to Joe how Keller could work, I actually came up with a way of articulating the only way you can have free will is because of God, which is something that had never occurred to me before. I mean, I'm still not sure I'm convinced by the argument, but it was an argument I had never considered before. So there's new coming out of being forced to explain something to the students, and the students saying things and going, oh yeah, I never even thought about it that way. So why the question matters? I think it matters because people do stuff when they believe in God. They do different kinds of things when they believe in God. And I think that the authority that's given to moral rules, the authority that's given to take particular actions or restrain yourself from doing particular actions rises to a whole new level if you believe that God exists. And we can look at history and look at lots of examples of people doing phenomenally good things because they believed in God. And we can look at a lot of people who did phenomenally horrible things because they believed in God. The authority, the legitimacy that a belief in God grants to a worldview raises the stakes to a level that you cannot ignore the question. So I'm working on an interfaith initiative. The reason that an atheist is working on an interfaith initiative is because religion matters. Religion matters because people believe that God exists. So the question is about what people do with these ideas, what people are allowed to do with these ideas, and what impact that has on the world that we live in.
I want you to follow up on what you just said about whether you believe in God sort of fundamentally changes your view of reality, and that only by believing in God can you have an epistemologically coherent worldview. Is that the last statement? And so, if that's right, are you saying that Dr. Sayers is wrong? And are you comfortable with that?
Maybe I could start with the last question first. Yes, Dr. Sayers is wrong. This isn't, though, because Dr. Sayers is somehow intellectually inferior. That's clearly not true. It's simply not true. There's a lot of intellectual muscle there. This isn't because Dr. Sayers is somehow morally reprehensible. This is simply the fact that God exists. That is a reality. And so working my way towards this kind of epistemological foundation, given that God exists, and given that God is in relationship, has a relationship with His creation, us, then taking that into account has to play into your worldview. And everything else then has to be seen in relationship to that. That is the starting point. So that's what I mean when I talk about it as being sort of an epistemological necessity, an epistemological foundation. The way I understand reality, the way I understand evidence, the way I understand the world is because of that thing, because God exists, and because He has a relationship with His creation.
So I need some clarity. Jeff asked if I was wrong, and you said yes. What was it I was wrong about? God existing, or the thing I just said about the relevance of religion, or?
I was referring to whether God exists or not.
Got it, okay. So the interesting moment for me in the class, I think it was the second or third day of class, Dr. Kitchen said what he said in class, that if you believe in God, it fundamentally changes everything. And I'm pretty sure that everyone in the class will agree with that. And I immediately said, no, I don't agree with that. And I think as we talked about it, and we set up this phenomenal sort of pedagogical tool, he would leave the class going, what the hell is Sayers thinking? And then we would talk at the beginning of the next class, and he says, I really want to ask you about that. So we had this great moment where the beginning of the class for the first 3 or 4 classes was Dr. Kitchen saying, last time you said this, what did you mean by that? And then the next time I would have a moment, I would say, well, Dr. Kitchens, you said that. Does that imply this? So for me, the reason that belief in God would not change everything is I think I agree to the degree that it would change our epistemological framework. But our epistemological framework informs everything. It doesn't necessarily change everything. So if we had an absolute proof that God did not exist, we wouldn't start being axe murderers. If we had a definitive proof that God did exist, people would continue to act morally. Atheists might still do the same behaviors they're doing. So I think where we disagree is a matter of degree, not necessarily the fact that the epistemological underlying sort of ideas wouldn't fundamentally change.
And just following up on my characterization of you earlier, saying
Where
that...
you said I was wrong?
No, I didn't. He said that. When, as a self-described, non-practicing atheist who finds the arguments for God's existence contradictory, are you willing to say that Dr. Kitchens is intellectually confused or incoherent?
No, I think whether something's reasonable, whether something makes sense, whether something holds together isn't the most basic level of what I'm working on. If you accept this one premise, it may be that the worldview follows from that. I think quite frequently if you take a particular leap about 1 or 2 ideas, everything else holds together. And Dr. Kitchens was very good about reminding us throughout the semester that our assumptions can shape and affect how we see things. So I think to that degree, I wouldn't say the word confusion. Maybe I'm just trying to be polite. I would assert that God does not exist when I'm more assertive. When I want to be super careful and make sure that someone can't call me out on something, I would say we can't know whether God exists. And any knowledge we have is a product of human construction of meaning. We use ideas, we use language, use metaphors, and there's limits to what language can describe. The tricky thing is language can also describe much more than is possible. So we have this moment where language can describe things that appear to be beyond reality, and language fails to actually capture how things really are. And what that duality of the sort of issues with language produces is the ability to say things that are outside reality that sort of hold together. God is all-powerful. But if you take the notion of all-powerful and push it, it breaks. It's not that all-powerful breaks, but the words don't describe something that makes sense logically. It's internally inconsistent. But I think that the way that religious folks think, the way that religious folks come to their ideas is based on this movement past these assumptions, these givens that were sort of inculcated with as children, the things that we're taught not to question. If you get past that, there's a certain logical cohesion to all religious systems. I would just argue about that first leap. I think if I look at more than one religious system, if I make that same leap, they all hold together. The tricky thing for me is if we have all of those different systems that purport to describe reality and claim to make sense out of reality, at a certain point, they can't all be right. And if we couple the notion that we've got lots of different versions of reality with the notion that language can both exceed reality and fall short of reality, the logical conclusion is that anything that we describe as God through language isn't going to actually be God. And I also trust the notion that if I get somewhere, if I stand at the pearly gates, my notions about God are going to change. There's this weird myth that atheists are going to resist God no matter what. God's going to call me up on the phone and say, hey, this is God. I'm going to go, oh, yeah, right, and hang up on him. If we're given the notion that there's some kind of proof, if we have some kind of experience isn't a great word, but some kind of experience that brings new evidence to this, I think we're open to that. I'm open to that. I can't speak for all atheists.
All right, moving on. Michael, or Dr. Kitchens, I've been calling you, is a professing Christian, and Dr. Sayers is a non-practicing atheist. In addition to that, Dr. Kitchens enters the discussion as a religious insider, belonging within an established religious tradition, and thus speaking as a confessional theologian on some level. On the other hand, I suspect there's some significance to you, Dr. Sayers, describing yourself as a non-practicing atheist. This suggests you're not a religious insider, but an outsider. And so you're not speaking as a theologian entirely, but also as an academic, not on behalf of a single religious tradition, but drawing on a comparative religious perspective. So if that characterization is correct for both of you, can you reflect on what that means and how you approach these sorts of questions as well?
Yes, I am a Christian, and that was something that we discussed before the class ever began, that my role in this class was not to argue to make people theists, to believe that there is something bigger, better, larger, stronger, more powerful than they are, that exists somewhere out there, but to argue for the God of the Bible. This kind of goes back to some of the things that Dr. Sayers was talking about, sort of different versions of reality, and this is where we fundamentally disagree, is I don't believe there are different versions of reality. I don't believe that we live in a relativistic world. I believe that there is truth and there are absolutes. And so as I'm coming from this as a Christian, I'm not interested in convincing the class to become theists. I'm interested in them to become Christians, so that's the basis from where I'm arguing from.
So I think that description is fairly good, and I sort of tongue-in-cheek call myself a non-practicing atheist, partly in the sense that I want to force people to question what that means, because we've got a lot of stereotypes about what an atheist is. I don't run around convincing people they're stupid if they believe in God. For me personally, more not facetiously, it just means that it isn't something that is on my conscious mind very often. I don't read atheist literature on a regular basis. I don't engage in these conversations on a regular basis. But I think bringing up the fact that I'm a scholar is important because it informs who I am. There isn't a Matt that is different when I'm at home than what's going on when I'm in school. These two are different aspects of the same person. And I think that the comparative approach may have informed the way I can talk about why I'm an atheist. But I was an atheist when I was 17, before I made sense out of this stuff, before I started doing any research on that. I probably was a lazy, I just don't want to be a religious person, I can't have these kinds of experiences, I don't see what's going on kind of atheist. But I'm not sure that those two are completely incompatible. Those are two parts of my experience that brought me to do this. And one thing to respond to Michael about, and this was another great moment in class, I called myself a relativist, and Michael brought that up in the next class, and we got into a really good conversation about how we make sense out of truth. And this is one of the themes that comes up over and over again whenever we speak. Michael thinks that we have access to absolute truth, and I doubt that. So I think a better way to talk about it is I have a subjective notion of truth. So I made a mistake and said there's multiple versions of reality, and that's not right. Michael's right to correct me. There's multiple worldviews that claim to describe reality. And I think that's a really good distinction to make. And I totally lost my train of thought. Let's just end there.
Well, just maybe one point to pick up on. I think access to the truth is kind of the key word there, and this is something that we've had discussions about. I don't think, and the relativist conversation was interesting because he describes himself as a relativist, but at the same time, when you sort of push, he recognizes, no, there is truth. It's this idea that we just simply can't access it. And this is where, when we talk about, and my sort of position statement for this was that, that to hold a biblical view of God is the only way we can really make sense of reality is, and this is what we've had lots of discussions with in class, is that we live like there's truth. We live like that the world has meaning, and not meaning just from some social construction, not that humans have value because of some social or evolutionary function, but because it's really true. And so we live like those things, and yet we say, well, we don't really know. And so those two things seem incompatible. The idea that we don't know these things doesn't make sense of reality for me.
So I think I hope I was careful and said, if there is a truth, we can't know it. I guess I would be fine saying there is a truth, but I don't think it changes the matter that we can't actually get to it. Language fails to capture these things. So I think the reason that we act as if these things are real is a function of human psychology. I think what I realized about two-thirds of the way through the class is that the psychological principle of projection helps us understand what's going on with religion. And I'm going to tell a possibly off-color joke to try and explain this. So a husband and wife have a teenage son, and they're having trouble with him. So they take him to a psychologist. They sit down. They have a long discussion about what's going on. And he's trying to get a sense of what's going on. And evidently this psychologist doesn't have the pre-made Rorschach test. So he pulls out some ink and puts it on a paper, folds it in half. And we all know what Rorschach test is, right? This ink blot that intentionally doesn't have any meaning. And it's about revealing what that person thinks. So they look at that and say, the teenager looks at it and says, oh, that's a redhead having sex. It's really good. And he says, okay, let me pull out. He pulls out another piece of paper and draws a circle. And he says, what is this? And he says, oh, that's a porthole on a ship. And it's like, oh, okay, what's going on inside the window? Oh, that's a brunette having sex. And he pulls out another piece of paper and draws a square. And he says, what's this? And he says, it's a window. What's going on the other side of the window? You guys know what's coming, right? It's a brunette having sex. And he says, okay, thank you, that helped me a lot. I need a couple minutes to talk to your parents. Can you go wait outside? And the teenager says, that's fine, but can I take those dirty pictures you drew with me? And I think that this is a perfect illustration of projection because the human mind seeks meaning, makes meaning. We look for patterns. When we look at the clouds and see a pony, there isn't really a pony there. It's our mind projecting onto something that looks roughly like a pony, and with clouds, we know it's not real. We know it's a product of our imagination. But like the teenager in this joke, what most folks do when they look at the world, and like Michael said, we act as if these things are real. We act as if there's something that is good. But that's a part of us making the mistake of thinking that that thing that we projected onto the universe has a reality outside of us. We're invested in this meaning making sense, but meaning comes from human beings. We can't walk around the universe and pick up a rock and find meaning hidden. Meaning is created through human construction.
So the idea that the Christian is in a trap of projection sounds like that it's some psychological trick that's being played within our heads. But remember, it's the atheist who lives in a world and pretends that it has meaning, knowing that it doesn't have meaning, right? Or in a world that has meaning, pretending as though it doesn't, and yet living like it does. Okay, so I think that there is some construction of reality going on, but I'm not sure that it's coming from the theist. And when I look up in the clouds and see what I think is a pony, the clouds are not a pony, but ponies exist, right? So, yeah, the mind may play tricks on us, but and I may generate the idea that that's a pony in a cloud, but it doesn't mean that ponies don't exist. So when I think that meaning is important and I live like that, it might be because there really is meaning.
Well, I think it's a mischaracterization of atheists to say that we don't have meaning. We have meaning, and you're right, it's made up. And I'm perfectly fine with that. Because that's how meaning works. It's our minds together, collaborating with other people on ideas, convincing each other that we're right, convincing the other people that they're wrong. The way that we make sense out of things is by constructing these things with language. And again, because language is limited and has the ability to go beyond, it creates this space where we can create things that don't exist. We can create unicorns. We can create dragons. We can create love. Love is real, but it's real because we make it real, because we give it life, because we pretend that it's something that really exists. You can't pull out love, despite Will back there probably thinking about our chemistry, as he always does in class.
I want to make sure you guys are done with that. Just a few moments ago, Professor Sayers talked about how his life as an academic and his interests as an academic are kind of one and the same as his belief or non-belief as a non-practicing atheist. So I guess the question to you, Professor Kitchens, is how is it that your beliefs relate or don't relate to your life as a psychology professor?
On a day-to-day practical, I sit down at my desk and go to my office. I don't know that from the outside that looks any different than what Professor Sayers does when he gets up in the morning, goes to his office, and sits down at his desk. I think that the difference goes down to that epistemological foundation, and I think that epistemological foundation matters a lot. And so when I sit down at my desk, or when I'm teaching a class, or when I'm studying in psychology, human mind, behavior, thoughts, these sorts of things, it's because I live in a world that God created. And I live in a world, and I'm created in His image, and I'm studying people who are created in His image. And so what I'm doing, I think, is meaningful and purposeful beyond, teaching evaluations and beyond publications and those sorts of things. I hope what I do and what I intend to do is do my work in a way that honors and glorifies God, and in a way that promotes human flourishing, and in a way that recognizes who He is in relationship to my work.
Okay, I've got one more question, then we'll open it up to the audience. And this is about eventually I wanted to get to the question of what would persuade you to think otherwise. So I guess to get to that, what counts as evidence for you, or what makes a good argument for you? And maybe more specifically, can you give us an example of a piece of evidence or a particular argument that you find most compelling, and why? And then eventually we'll get to this question of, can you imagine a scenario in which you would be presented with a piece of evidence or with an argument that would make you think differently about the subject of God?
So the evidence that I find convincing. Tim Keller, in his book, he has a chapter called the Clues for God. And so he sort of goes through and he kind of picks out pieces. He says that there's no definitive proof. It's not like we can go and, look under a rock and go, aha, there's God, come look. And but that there are clues from God. So he talks about the clues from nature, and the clues from our own moral consciousness and conscience, and all these kinds of things. And I think all of those things are compelling. I think there is no one of those things that you would look at and go, there's evidence. We've gone through this meticulously in the class, and some of the students, right, at the end of the class will say things like, this is so hard because I hear this and that sounds convincing and this sounds right, and then I hear the other side and, well, that sounds convincing and that sounds right, and so they sort of say, well, there's kind of a stalemate. So there's all these clues that I think are convincing, and I think they're important, and I think we need to consider all of those things. But I don't think I would be honest if I left out the idea that just simply Scripture weighs a lot into how it is that I understand God and His existence and those kinds of things. And that one of the things that sort of became more clear for me in this class is that when we talk about God, what we're talking about is a supernatural being, a being that is all-powerful, that is infinite, that is eternal, that is omniscient, and so forth. It has all these characteristics. And how is it that natural, finite beings can know God? I mean, why are you here? Why are we having this discussion? Why are we even considering this thing that doesn't exist? And to me, the reason that we're having this conversation, the reason we're talking about God and not flying ponies or any of these other kinds of things, is because God has revealed Himself. He's revealed Himself in nature. I think there's a sense of this. He reveals Himself in our own consciousness. When we think about morality, when we think about meaning, those things exist, and we have to, if anything, pretend like that they exist, because we can't get out of that. And He's revealed Himself in Christ, and He's revealed Himself in His Word. So there is good reason to believe in God. The other part of the question was, well, what would convince you to not believe in God? What would be the evidence? When I started studying this for my first year experience class 2 years ago or whatever it was, I began to start reading a lot of the new atheists, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, those folks, and began to listen to debates and really take these things serious. Sort of hold it and say, is what I believe about God really true? Let's examine this. And I read a lot of Christian apologetic literature as well. But the thing that convinced me most, the thing that I felt most bold about, was after reading the New Atheists, after reading Dawkins, after reading Hitchin, after reading Harris. It's like, this is the best that we can throw at it, and it's just not convincing. There's no good reason not to believe in God. Let me go a little further, though, and say, is there a piece of evidence? Is there something that would convince me that God doesn't exist? And in some ways, I don't think that I can know how to answer that question, because, as I said earlier, God is an epistemological foundation. He is a reality, and so for God not to exist would have to mean that reality would fundamentally have to change for me to say, oh, well, there really isn't a God.
So the most compelling argument for God, I think, shifts as I grow older and hear different arguments. When I was a sophomore in college, the ontological argument for the existence of God had me in angst about my atheism for about a week, and then I realized it was just a word game. But I think that as I move forward and think about it, what Michael described earlier is this sense that this is just wrong. This innate feeling that there must be something out there. I mean, I've done presentations where I talked to students at high schools, and somehow it came out that I was an atheist, and they said, well, how can you not believe? Look at a rainbow, how can you not believe? There's this thing built into us that we want to believe. That's the most compelling thing to me. The tricky thing is I don't think I trust myself enough. There's lots of moments where I have this very compelling feeling, and it turns out to be wrong. Like, I should eat that whole cake. That is not one that I should follow. I don't know how to make sense out of these different things. It's because of the language thing, because of the way that the human body wants us to do stuff that sometimes doesn't make sense, but really wants us to do it. In the end, that doesn't compel me because it fails to live up to sort of logic. So what kind of evidence is really a great question. And I think I was joking with friends about how Ken and Ham saying absolutely nothing at all, and Bill Nye saying just anything at all. I was like, yeah, that's the difference between atheists and religious people. But I realized I don't know if there is anything that would convince me, because So the best way to say this is one of the other students in class, Becky, one time I was trying to make a point about difference and engaging real difference, and I started talking about aliens, as I often do in class. And Becky said, you know what, I'm pretty sure that if an alien showed up and knocked on Dr. Sayers' head, he still wouldn't believe it was an alien. And I think there's actually, she was joking, but I think there's something to that, and I had the same conversation with my sister last weekend, that I would always call it into question. I would always be skeptical. I would always try and get out of it. If I had an experience, and I've tried over and over again actively to have an experience, and I've tried over and over again passively to remain open to some kind of experience. And she said, you don't even know what you're looking for. And I think the more and more I think about it, she's right, because whatever I find, I would be able to explain with science. I would be able to explain with some kind of practical naturalistic impulse. Now, I also want to push back against that. A friend of mine one time was talking about something. He says, we can explain ghosts with science. I'm like, well, this case right here, we don't have any explanation. It's all right, we'll come up with an explanation later. So I don't want to fall into that doctrinaire way of thinking about science. It'll all get figured out eventually. We can master it. Because I think that mystery, that not knowing, that suspending that last little shred of something. I call myself an atheist because I want people to just put their money on the table and have the conversation. But if you push me hard enough, I'm happy being an agnostic. But an agnostic is boring. An agnostic is a cop-out. You're not going to have a debate between two agnostics. They're both just going to say, yeah, you're right, we can't prove it. So I want to put my skin in the game. I want to put my money on the table. And if I'm wrong, my hope is that God is a big enough man, he's going to be able to work it out. He's not going to hold it against me for eternity. Did that answer all your questions, Jeff?
I think it did. So we have skin in the game, and now it's time for the audience to
Clamor for the microphone?
Yeah, go to the microphone, ask your questions. So push this conversation wherever you want to see it go. And we do have a microphone right here. I guess the fairest way to do this would be for us to line up if you have a question, and we'll try to get through them as quickly as possible. And Tony might have some from the audience on the web as well who are watching this.
Ready? Brian, go ahead.
I just want to put my cards on the table and say that I'm a Gnostic atheist, and I do have, I am definitely practicing. But I wanted to ask a quick question about, you had said that there was, there's no way for you to be able to answer the question about what would it take to change your mind. But you also say that you draw as your epistemological foundation God, specifically the Christian God. And I'm wondering exactly how you can draw an epistemological foundation from the Christian God as a concept didn't exist until 2000 years ago. The Jewish Jehovah is much older, but by the same token, there are plenty of human concepts of God that date way past even Jehovah. So how you can draw an epistemological foundation from what's essentially a concept that we can pick a point in time and say, well, yeah, this is when humans invented it, and then say that's an absolute foundation for your entire epistemological framework.
So you begin the question with the assumption that this is a human construction. And I would say that's not the case. And I would say that you begin your epistemological foundation built on naturalism and built that God doesn't exist. And so that we could, when we begin to think about the evidences for God, or thinking about the, if you will, the clues of God, you begin by saying, well, look, humans constructed that. Well, that's, I don't think that that's true. And So I think that, so I think we have different starting points.
Okay, I'll move to the back of the line.
Yeah, but what do you say to the notion of it being historically datable?
That's that's a softball.
But if this,
God always existed. Our idea of God is revealed in history.
but if this is the only way to make sense of reality, then how does one account for that prehistory?
Well, I think God always revealed himself in nature. It's his creation, and I think he's made it plain to us throughout time. And God revealed himself from the very beginning in creation and in his word. And so you talk about, I think that you want to date it as, well, here is when this thing was written down in Scripture, but I don't think that that's the start of God.
Well, you kind of made reference to the idea, especially Dr. Sayers, that we as humans kind of make up these importances that we put on things. So I guess my question is, how would you respond to the idea that everything just inherently has value, has importance, is like a spiritual kind of being, even if it is like a rock or like that table? And if you think that that's something that's like kind of selfish, like that humans do, that we put our importance over that inherent value, and we can't really know whether or not that exists.
Right, I think value is just a more specific version of meaning, and value is created the same way that meaning is created. Historically, folks have invested lots of things with value the same way that they invest it with meaning. The notion that everything has some spiritual essence or self or value, I think, is simply one of the things that we do. And I think the way you described it is pretty close to how I would describe it, is that we've projected those things onto that. The interesting thing is, if we want to eat that thing, we don't do it very much, right? So it's okay to kill animals because they taste good. So there's even inconsistency in the way we decide to project that. But yeah, I think value is just us saying that this is important. Saying that this is important, saying that this is interesting is all sort of our opinion. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Becky.
Hi. I believe it was Dr. Kitchens who said that a lot of the students in the class are experiencing kind of a stalemate effect, with arguments countering each other and kind of constant duel back and forth, which I would agree with. So you both have kind of chosen a side, if you will. How do you deal with the stalemate and still maintain your personal beliefs? Does that make sense?
Are you asking, is there a stalemate inside of each of us?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. Michael?
No. No, it's a good question. The good thing about the class is that Dr. Sayers is bright. He's intelligent. He keeps me honest. He is fantastically consistent with his own worldview. And we've both said this to each other privately, and I think we've said it in class, and so we might as well say it here, that this class consumes our thoughts, right? I mean, we think about this stuff all the time. Dr. Sayers mentioned earlier about how we sort of have gotten into this pedagogical mode where before the beginning of the next class, we say, hey, you said that thing at the next class. I'll just say that's because I'm a slow thinker and it takes me 2 days to come up with a comeback. And 2 days from now, I'm going to have a real zinger for a couple things here. But no, but so these things consume us, and I wrestle with these things, right? I mean, these things, I think sometimes on Tuesdays and Thursdays when I come home, my family thinks I'm a little bit of a zombie or something, but that's because these things are still turning in my head, and so sometimes I have insights, and sometimes I just kind of have to table this and say that is something I got to figure something out, So, no, I don't have a stalemate in the sense of I don't know what I believe, and this thing has drawn questions and that make me question everything I believe, but it's great to think about these things deeper and to make sure that I am working towards truth and being honest in that way.
So I think if I avoid the word stalemate, your question is awesome, because I think stalemate feels like a stopping point, a sort of two things have hit and they can't move. I think what I've experienced quite frequently is as I try and explain the other position, and I try and what I say to the students over and over again in class is, you need to set up the opposition as strongly as you can. That way you look awesome when you knock them down. If you knock down somebody's argument and it's not done very well, that's not very impressive, right? This is the straw man fallacy. So what quite frequently happens is I wind up articulating that position better than I ever had before, and if I'm forcing myself to take it seriously, there is that moment where there's this intellectual gravity, right? So that moment when I was trying to explain the free will to God, it was really an amazing moment, because it was like, this actually kind of works. And I don't know if I want to describe it as a sort of elastic I spring back to myself, because I think that the more and more I do this, I allow myself to be adjusted and moved and shifted by that sort of experience. I mean, I'm still whatever the hell you want to call me, but so it hasn't moved me very far, but it's been enriching, I think.
Thank you.
Can we get everyone in first and then?
Hey, Shelley.
Hi there, Matt. Appreciate this conversation here this evening. This is more of an observation than anything else, and I heard it from both of you several times. Maybe this is the feminist in me, but I've heard God referred to as male, him, many times. If God is ultimate being, I would, and I think Scripture supports this, that God is beyond gender. God is spirit. The other thing that I heard, but I appreciate the fact that you actually used the word, Matt, mystery. What I often hear in conversations regarding, theism versus atheism is a lot of dualistic language. And mystery, to me, moves us beyond that. And so I think that's extremely important. And I think as far as Christian argumentation is concerned, and I would consider myself a Christian, very much in flux, but certainly would come down on the Christian side. I think if we can continue to grow and move beyond some of the dualistic thinking, especially on the Christian side, and I really appreciate some of the more progressive Christians that have been speaking much in terms of the contemplative mind or the non-dualistic consciousness. It's not something you're going to read in some of your standard books, but I think what it does, to me, it helps get to that reality beyond pigeonholing us in certain categories. And so I think it's a way for all of us to continue to stretch no matter what side we're on. So thanks.
Let me just briefly say, there was a lot of thought given to how we characterize tonight's debate or conversation, which is why we call it a conversational debate. And a lot of it was we didn't want it to be sort of pitting one side against another.
Right, and I didn't mean to imply that that's what I'm hearing necessarily.
I'm just echoing what you're saying, and
Okay.
I think it's to their credit that they, instead of this being a sort of smackdown, really sort of modeling a kind of openness to hearing what one another has to say. Obviously, sort of the level of respect.
Until you push us to say, is he wrong?
Right. But even then, you guys were. But can you please comment on the question about the gendered language for God that was used throughout tonight?
You were just doing that in class today, right? Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
The Bible typically refers to God as Father and He, and I would agree with you that God is a spirit, and so I typically use the He language because they talk about God as Father and these sorts of things, and so.
I could reiterate the whole culturally specific stuff. We don't need to do that. The part of the non-practicing is me being provocative and pushing. Mm-hmm. So recently, every once in a while, I refer to God as she just to shake people up. It usually makes someone chuckle, and then they sort of move on. But yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that's a factor of forgetting that we're doing this thing, we're projecting these ideas, and Surprisingly, he looks like us. So it was the ancient Greek that said we shouldn't be surprised that the Egyptian gods look Egyptian and the Nubian gods look Nubian and the Chinese gods look Chinese. Yeah. And the male gods look male.
Thank you.
I'm John. I want to thank you guys for being here tonight. I want to thank for the setting of the format. I think the dialogue is good. We get a lot further when we have dialogue like this. So where the question that I want to ask, and I want to put some foundation to the question after I express it. Religion has a lot of different connotations, a lot of ways that it can be defined, but the question is, isn't atheism just a religion? And so I looked at doing a survey through philosophy, and I concluded philosophy is a belief system. I looked through Christianity, it's a belief system. I looked through Islam, it's a belief system. Isn't atheism a belief system?
Is it a belief system? Yes. Is it a religion? I don't think so. But I also think that belief system makes a pauper out of religion. If we just talked about the beliefs in Christianity, we'd be missing a significant portion of what Christianity is. If you believe these things, you're compelled to act in certain ways. Most people throughout history, most religious people alive today, what they do defines their religion. Now, you're on to something I think very interesting. I just want to articulate it differently. So in one of my classes, we read an article about Disney World, and the students read it and said, is he saying Disney World's a religion? No, and he's super careful about this. And I would say atheism, Disney World, capitalism, all these things that we do operate on the same level as religion. Disney World is doing for us the stuff that used to be done exclusively by religion. I would agree with you, in addition to all that, I would agree with you that atheism somewhat puts itself in the corner of religion because it is, in large part, just a reaction to religion. And that's what I want to sort of get at that with the non-practicing is, I want to figure out a way, and I've started using the word transtheism, although I'm not even sure exactly what the hell I mean by that. The atheism becomes the sort of handmaid of religion. But then religion doing the intellectual thing is basically a reaction to the Enlightenment. So I want to find some way to sort of snap out of that, you said, I said, you said, back and forth. But yeah, I think there's something to that. I would just articulate it a little differently.
Let's take one more question, and then we've got, not just one more question, then I'm going to pause, and we're going to have a question from Tony, and then we'll go back to the line. So.
Hi.
Hello.
So I've heard of this passage quote. I don't know what you'd exactly call it, but I was just curious to see each of your perspectives on it. So it's it goes, so if you believe in God and say, well, I'm a Christian, so say I'm wrong, I go my whole lifetime wasting my lifetime. I mean, depending on how you view it, let's just say that's how it goes. But if you go your whole life not believing in God and I'm right, then you wasted eternity. I just want to see your perspective on that quote.
Michael.
Yeah, so this is it's like Pascal's wager, right? Is that if you believe in God and you're wrong about that and you die, you sort of lose nothing, right? You felt like your life had meaning and those kinds of things, and if you're right, you go to heaven. But if you look at it from the other side and you say you don't believe in God and you're wrong, well, you're in a lot of trouble, right? I mean, I think it's kind of interesting. I guess I don't really like that because you're sort of hedging your bets. And I said earlier, and I think this is I'm not really interested in convincing people of theism, right? I'm interested in convincing people of Christianity. And Christ doesn't ask us to sort of take your chances and these kinds of things. I mean, when what Scripture says about the Christian life is dying to your old self and putting on the new self. That is to to put away your own, to stop living for yourself and to start living for Christ. And so to say that, well, you're just sort of hedging your bets, it doesn't sound like you've given yourself over. And so I think that there might be some logic in that, and there may be some reason for doing that, but I don't really find it convincing in terms of really living your life out as a Christian.
I agree with Michael on this. I think Pascal's wager is sort of a weird thing. It's weird in two ways. If God does exist, when you get there, he's going to probably realize that you're only doing that not to piss him off. The second thing is I think it fundamentally misunderstands how belief works. We can't just choose to believe in stuff. Like, okay, I'm going to believe in unicorns. It just doesn't work that way, right? I like the way that you formulated it much better than the way that Pascal does. Did you waste your life? Because that question forces us to think, right? If you believe in God and that makes you do good stuff, go for it, right? And I think that's where my perspective is, that I don't want to convince everybody that they should be atheists. I'm going to convince them that it may not be the most reasonable thing to do. It may not be logical. There's no really sort of airtight reason for believing in it. But if that's what makes sense to you, if that's what you need to make sense out of the world, if that's going to make you be a good person, if you need religion to make you a good person, please believe, definitely. So your question, I think, makes it more nuanced in the sense that where I started tonight, right? It's about what we do. It's about the impact of our ideas on the world. So I think you've sort of one-upped Pascal there. Thanks.
All right, Tony, can you grab the microphone and give it to Tony? Sure. This is from our virtual audience.
Okay, so I have a question. It's from a former LVC student, actually, Marquise Bay, and it's directed specifically to you, Dr. Kitchens. His question is, I have a question for Dr. Kitchens. How does a Christian like himself explain the incredible diversity of conceptions of and voices of God throughout history and between people? That is to say, how would he explain the antebellum Bible thumpers who were convinced that Jesus was returning within their lifetime, or that my blackness was a mark of God's wish to enslave me, or that some preachers feel that God tells them that homosexuality is a sin, while others feel that it's not?
It's a big question. So let me maybe try and boil this down just a little bit. There's lots of things packed in there. Good question. I think the question kind of comes down to, so there's lots of religions. Why Christianity? Is that fair? Is that a fair representation of the question?
I think he was also asking about the diversity of interpretation within Christianity.
Okay, so let me maybe do two things then. All right, so begin with, so why Christianity rather than any other religion? Well, as a general rule, as a general kind of heuristic, and we were discussing this in our last class, religion, and Dr. Sayers alluded to this a minute ago, ask you to sort of be good, and that it is, here's religion, here's your belief, behave yourself. I don't need religion to be good. I don't think that Dr. Sayers is a closet axe murderer because he's an atheist. I actually think Dr. Sayers is a fine, morally upstanding person. I think he has a lot of integrity, and so it's not about being good. But as a kind of a rule of thumb, religions ask you to do good things, and what Christianity asks us to do, and what I'm working at here is to have a relationship with God is not about something that I do, but it is about something that He has given me, that it is about His grace. And I can't do enough good things. How much good can I do to weigh out the bad? And it sort of gets in this kind of like marbles on a balancing scale here, where there's a little bit of good, a little bit of bad. Well, how much do you have to weigh these things out? And that's not the way. That's not the way things work. Okay, so I'm sure there'll be follow-up questions there, but I'll move on. The diversity in religion, within Christianity. There's a lot of diversity within Christianity. There's a couple of, a few people in class said something like, well, there's 6,000 varieties of Christianity. And rhetorically, it's a powerful argument. It works. That's kind of astonishing. But it's a little bit... It doesn't quite paint a clear picture of what's going on. So if you can sort of take a broad strokes look at this, and you look at sort of the major varieties, if you will, of Christianity in America, you might be able to divide up in lots of different ways, but let's just think about 3 different ways. So you have Roman Catholicism, you have sort of fundamentalist, Orthodox, if you will, conservative Christian, and then you have more liberal Christianity. And what you see there is what are the differences in the doctrine of Scripture across those things. So, for example, the Roman Catholics, they have a very high view of Scripture. They also have a high view of papal infallibility and councils and these kinds of things. And when you look at conservative Christians, they have a high view of Scripture alone. And when you look at sort of the modern liberal Christianity, it's about experience, and those are the things that have authority. So when you have a variety of authority, the rhetorical weight of that is, wow, look, everybody's looking at Scripture and coming up with these different varieties of how to interpret this. So some people are saying this and some people are saying that. But when you begin to kind of dig down in these things, what you find is that at the heart, a lot of these things is not how they interpret Scripture, but the weight they give to Scripture.
Your turn.
So I guess this was addressed mildly with the Pascal's triangle and actually a previous question. But did you say near the beginning that there's no reason to not believe in God? Did you say that?
Did I? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I think that's a pretty bold statement. Thoughts of hell can keep you up at night, for example. and you might argue that someone who, since we're talking about the Christian God, or the God from the Bible specifically, I think since we're talking about that, believing in that God might incline you to, or would incline you to believe in the Bible, and that could cause you to have beliefs that you wouldn't have otherwise wanted to believe. It could make you sexist or racist. I could, obviously.
Is the question, does the Bible make you do bad things? Is that the question?
The question is, isn't it? Aren't there some negatives possibly to believing in God?
You're providing a response to the opening statement where you said there's no good reason not to believe in God. Right. He's providing good reasons not to believe in God.
Okay. So no, good point. So I found the evidence and find the arguments for God convincing, and I think that there's good reason to believe in God, and I think there's no really good reason not to believe in God. I find those less compelling. Are there people who do bad things when they read the Bible? Are there people who use it to do bad things? Yes. I don't think that the Bible calls us to do bad things. I think there's a difference between those things, I would say.
Okay. I'm just going to, we got 4 more people lined up, unless people are really burning to ask more questions. Line up now or stay in your seat, I guess, and I would ask sort of people to be brief in their questions, too.
I've been waiting a while. Give me 1 sec. I have a bunch of questions I could ask, and we could keep conversation going on, but just so I don't run us out of time, I just want to ask one, and I hope it's not too glib, but I'm presuming you do believe in hell. Yeah, that's the lead into the question. It's not the actual question. You do believe in hell?
Yes.
And all-knowing, all-powerful, etc. God. would not an all-knowing, all-powerful God know what it would take to convince me of his existence? And if so, why hasn't he done so up to this point?
Yeah, good question. And thank you for your patience. You've been standing in line waiting a long time. Appreciate that. So the question is, why hasn't God, who is all-knowing and all-powerful and could convince you that He exists? Why hasn't He done so? And the straightforward answer is, I don't know. I don't know why He hasn't convinced you. So sort of thinking back, let me kind of, it's a big question. So sort of going back here, I think we'd say is that in creation, God created us. He created us to have a relationship with Him. Sin entered the world, and it has darkened the way we look at the world. It has distorted our view of reality, and it has driven, if you will, a wedge between us. And out of His grace and out of His mercy, not by the things that we've done, not by the things that, not because I'm wise enough or strong enough or good enough. He has revealed Himself and changed my heart, changed the hearts of Christians to believe in Him. I don't know. I can't speak to why He hasn't done this in your life or any of those sorts of things.
Are you going to answer?
No, I'm
Okay.
just going to welcome Cody to the microphone.
I'm pleased and pained by the line that's formed for questions. I am pleased because this is our dream as professors to have people lining up and asking questions, but pained realizing we're sort of running out of time. So, yes, be brief. If necessary, we can sort of lump some of the questions together, but we'll try to sort of get through them as quickly as possible.
Okay, so my question refers to what I think is called the first cause. And so if God created the world, this is towards you, Dr. Kitchens, who created God? And if your answer is that He's always been around, how are you okay with believing the fact that He's just always been here when everything we've ever seen or know to believe has a lifespan? And then for you as well, Dr. Sayers, so if God didn't create the world, like was it the Big Bang or something like that? And then if that had occurred, where did those atoms come from? And then if the universe is just always around, like what drives you to believe that it's okay for it just always be existing? Like, why is there never a starting point? That's just my question.
Thanks. So the law of causality is that every effect has a cause. God is not an effect. He is a cause. What you've noted is right in our observations. Is what we see is that the world is contingent. It is an effect. And so if everything is contingent, there has to be something that is necessary. There has to be a starting point. And so the first cause argument doesn't tell me for certainty that the God of the Bible then exists. But given that the Bible exists, I then attribute that first cause to God.
So for me, the first cause thing is about whether something began everything or whether everything has always existed. And it sounded like you were trying to get us to talk about both of those. So if the universe has a beginning, then God created it. How come God doesn't have a beginning? I'm comfortable saying I have no idea. I think Kant said that it's equally likely that there was a beginning and this all started, and it's equally likely that it's been going on forever. The fact that everything that we see has a beginning and an end doesn't mean that everything has a beginning and an end. It just means all the stuff that we've seen has a beginning and an end. So what's going on before the Big Bang? I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm not even going to pretend to be a scientist. But my guess is all the stuff that was in that was everything. Who knows where it came from? I'm not sure it really matters. What happened, 27 billion years ago? I'm going to live 65 years if I'm lucky. I'd rather worry about those 65 years. Thanks, Cody.
Thank you.
Michael, In regards, this doesn't have to deal with the source or the origins of knowledge, but more as far as the quantity of knowledge, and as far as epistemology, what you guys were referring to earlier. But I'm not pushy either to push you into agnosticism. It would be my hope that you would go beyond that. But so I agree, that's boring. But as far as knowledge goes, as an atheist, as a proclaimed atheist, how can you say, and you may have talked about this before, how can you say that you know for sure that God doesn't exist? Like, of all the knowledge here, how much of the knowledge here would you say, percentage-wise, you yourself has as a person? Or we think in the world, whether you got engineers, scientists, et cetera, how much as a person would you have of knowledge to be confident enough to say, I know for sure that God doesn't exist?
Right. I think the way that I would get at this is if I go back to Becky's question about the stalemate, and the evidence on both sides is as convincing as it's going to be to that individual person. The reason that I want to get off of agnostic to atheist is I just want to make my choice. And in some ways, there's a parallel between the faith that it takes to believe, despite the fact that the clues don't all add up to the perfect case, and there's a faith that is required to say, no, he doesn't exist. So I'm very clear about the fact that I'm making the positive assertion that he does not exist. And I also realize that I'm making that claim irregardless of that last definitive silver bullet. And I'm okay with that.
One more quick question, please. Have you ever read the Bible?
Most of it, yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks.
And the Quran, and 6 or 7 different Hindu scripture texts, and lots of Buddhist texts.
Okay, so you said most of it, that's the whole New Testament, and how much?
Most of the Pentateuch and most of the New Testament. Sorry,
Okay,
Deuteronomy
so
killed me.
most of the New Testament is what?
I couldn't be more specific than that.
Okay,
Sorry.
all right, thanks.
You mean it wasn't Leviticus? Come on.
Leviticus has got some good stuff.
All right.
All right. I just wanted to go back to a question that I believe both of you addressed earlier. It was, does our belief or disbelief in God fundamentally change the way we look at the world? I believe that was the question. Dr. Sayers, you said that no, it doesn't. Like you brought up the example, like a religious person turned atheist, you don't think they would go on a killing spree. And I agree with that, but I just wanted to ask you, don't you think that that same person would maybe interpret life events differently? Like suppose, like the death of a loved one, wouldn't that fundamentally change the way they look at that?
Right. I think the tricky thing with this question is how you word it. When Dr. Kitchen says it would change everything, I say no. When you say, would it fundamentally change you, I say yes. To me, it's a matter of degree. And I think this may be from my training of saying to students over and over and over again, don't ever use the word all or none or every. Again, the answer to the last question was he doesn't exist, which is an absolute. So maybe I'm being a bit hypocritical. I think it would change a lot. I guess I question the question that this belief would change who I am fundamentally rests on the notion that who I am is 90% what I believe. We're embodied beings who are constantly doing practices. So part of my resistance to this question is to resist the notion that what we believe is our religion, what we believe is who we are, what we do is who we are. I can say I'm a feminist, but if I treat women poorly, it doesn't mean anything. So my resistance to the question is about saying there's more to us than just belief, and this absolute or not absolute.
Okay. Yeah,
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.
So I have 2 questions, one directly for Dr. Sayer, and the second one for the, maybe both of you can make a comment on it. So Dr. Sayer, do you believe that the existence of God, or the lack of the existence of God, inherently means that there's no afterlife, or what's your belief on that? Are those tied in, and then how do those two, the concept of an afterlife?
Go ahead and do your second question so we can do them together.
And then the second question as a wider, does the afterlife or the belief of a God drive meaning into life? And that may be more for you.
For the first question, this is what we are. We are an accidental concatenation of chemical and physical processes. We're a epiphenomenon of a physical world, and when that physical existence stops, we stop. We'll be immortal. As Woody Allen says, I don't want to be immortal through my works, I want to be immortal by not dying. But that's a wish. I don't think, so the short answer is no. And I think the second one is for you.
Does the afterlife cause meaning?
Yeah, is it more so the belief in an afterlife or the belief in God that drives meaning into life?
It's a belief in God, and heaven is part of understanding the whole Scripture and what my relationship with God is like and where it's going and those kinds of things. It's not as though there's a big reward, there's a big treasure chest at the end that does it for you, right? So that's not what the meaning is. It's God.
So you're thinking like Peter Berger, it's our fear of death that makes us make meaning. I think that's right, but only as far as it goes. There's a lot more stuff than just our fear of death.
Okay, thank you.
How's everybody doing?
Hi.
I guess my question kind of branches off what Marquise was talking about with the diversity of Christianity itself. And so I guess if you would ask any Christian, I guess their version of God would be different than the person sitting next to them. So in this argument, we're arguing your version of your Christian God compared to somebody who had to have a different version of the same God, but in essence a different God.
Yeah, what I think I've tried to be really consistent with in the class and so forth is that the God that we're talking about is not a God of my imagination or my own conception, that I'm resting on the authority of Scripture. And so if someone were to come to me and say, look, you've got God all wrong here, there's, I suppose, two ways we could go about figuring that out. One way is we could both agree that Scripture has authority and we could go there and figure out and reason together and figure out what that says about God. The other way is if they say, well, I don't really believe what Scripture says, well, then now we have a fundamental different disagreement about the basis of our authority. So there's naturally going to be a disagreement, right? Because what I'm saying is not my own conception of God; it's what's here, and there are those things revealed, or versus a product of my own sort of imagination of what I think God would be like.
Thank you.
You would say that in order to get to heaven, you have to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, right?
Yes.
That's how you get into heaven. And if you disagree with that or don't believe in that, you go to hell, right?
Yes.
All right. So say there's tribes in Brazil that have no connection to the outside world at all. And so do they go straight to hell because they don't know anything about your religion? Do you think they go straight to hell? Like, that seems really unfair that they have no chance at all. What do you think about that?
First, I want to commend you for your heart for evangelism, and if you would like, we should join us in trying bringing that word to the Brazilians.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just mean...
I'm joking. I got it. I understand the weight of your question.
Yeah.
So I think there's two ways to think about this. There's two ways I would respond to that. Is one that I think God has revealed Himself in nature so that people know that there is a God. The second part to that is I don't really know what God does with those people. I trust that the Judge of all the earth will do right. So I don't know what that means for the Brazilians. I don't know.
Okay, and just like that. He's going to go to hell because he doesn't believe what you believe. He's going to go and perish, and after he dies, you believe that he will just go straight to hell. And
there's still time.
All right, thanks.
Dr. Sayers, I was wondering, for the practicing or non-practicing atheist, where is morality based?
The best expression I've seen of this is that God is not good by, I'm forgetting his first name, Epstein. He's a humanist chaplain at Harvard. He says that the impetus for morality is in the needs of other people. I think that's the most succinct way to say it. My way of saying it before I read that is, I don't want to hurt. I don't want to suffer. If I want to take seriously that other people have that same experience, and I want to have that extended to me, I have to extend it to other people. So the mutuality of our desires not to suffer, our mutuality and the need to find a way to continue, I think it comes from empathy. I think it comes from the recognition that I'm not the only one that exists. I'm not the only one, to use Epstein words, that have needs. And I think if we conceive of other people as being different versions of ourselves, we owe them the respect that we want. And for me, that's enough. I know that for some folks, that may not be enough weight to push them to do good stuff, but I think if you take that seriously, if you take the notion that those other people are just a different version of you, you can't but want to help them. You can't but want to at least avoid hurting them.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Is that based off of your feeling that ebbs and flows as though you can't believe in God as well?
I missed the middle of that, I'm sorry.
Before in the conversation, you said that you've had feelings that come and go, and there's no way to verify God because of that feeling. So how can you guarantee that your feeling for another human being is going to stay constant and that you're going to actually value them through and through as though they're a human being just as you are,
right,
when you're not able to do that with what I would use as a supreme being?
Right.
Whether it's whatever God you would choose.
Right, I think that's the recognition that we're going to fail. We're human beings. I think the notion that there is an absolute morality that we need to live up to, and we're going to be held to the standard of not living up to this absolute morality, is itself incoherent. If morality is about rules, if two rules ever conflict ever, you have to make a choice between two rules. All of a sudden, your absolute morality becomes relative. There is no such thing as an absolute morality. We are going to fail. We are going to screw up. And it's relying on each other to have empathy included in that notion of looking at other people and saying they don't want to hurt, they don't want to suffer, is that recognition that every once in a while they're going to screw up because every once in a while I am too. And I think it's pushing us to learn from those mistakes, pushing it to recognize that sometimes we can't trust our impulses and rely on other folks and their behavior, and sometimes we can trust our behavior and do it. And every once in a while we're going to make mistakes, sometimes pretty big, sometimes pretty small. I think it's a matter of learning from those mistakes and looking at the aggregate of human experience that promotes the most well-being for the most number of people. And that's another trap about the most good for the most people, but I'm not sure there's any way out of that trap, even if you convince yourself that there's an absolute notion of morality.
So there is no basis then really for morality for the non-practicing or practicing atheist, essentially?
I thought I just gave you one for the last few minutes.
Okay. I would disagree, but okay.
So there's no more people there, but Tony has one more question. Is that correct? And this will be our last question of the evening.
All right, this was asked by a Gloria Thomas, and this is again addressed to Dr. Kitchens. This may have kind of come up already to some extent, but anyway, why would an omnipowerful deity want praise and worship from his creations? Sounds pretty human to me.
It has the value of succinctness.
It does. I don't know that God doesn't need our praise. He was perfectly fine before we were here, before he created us. He didn't need it. He created us out of his own goodness and his own love, and so I don't know that he needs us.
That's your cue, Jeff.
All right. So thank you. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to Dr. Kitchens and Dr. Sayers. And we'll do this again.